Hi, Trevor White. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. It's very exciting to be here.
Yes, very, very exciting to be here. And we've been looking forward to it all week. So, Trevor, I would love to know what triggered you to jump into premarital counseling.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people that are counselors have some sort of like foundational experience, growing up that inspires them to get in the field. And for me, my family, my parents got divorced, and I was, party to experiencing the devastation, right, that can wreak on a family, on a person's life, right. And I felt very strongly, as I got older, like I really would like to be a part of helping prevent, the kind of devastation that comes from something like that, right? Because so often it can be prevented, right? Especially with good preparation heading into a marriage. And so that was my initial kind of interest in it. And as I got into the field, as I started working with clients, the people that I enjoyed working with most were the premarital people, right? It's just like so interesting, such a time of life where there's so much excitement, there's anxiety, right? There's so much going on for you as a person. You're making this huge life decision, and it's fun to be to participate with that with people. So I really have come to love it and enjoy it.
Yeah. And you seem to have such a passion for it. And I love that although it came from an unfortunate situation, that you've made that unfortunate situation really beautiful and something constructive for, you professionally and personally. And so I'd love to know more about how you've taken your personal experience and really pulled it into your professionalism and into your job. How did that work?
Right. Well, I think so much of what as I grew up, experienced the divorce with my parents, learned more from talking with them about their experience and seeing how, not necessarily knowing exactly what you're, looking for in a marriage, or the challenges in the early stages of a relationship, especially before kids enter the picture, it's such a pivotal time, right? It's an exciting time. It's a time where people feel really, like they have the most energy maybe for the relationship, but it's such a pivotal time to kind of create that solid foundation to build on. Because, in my family's experience, we built on a foundation that wasn't solid. And because of that, things fell apart. And so I always think back to that, when I'm talking with people that are getting married, like, we have to make sure this foundation that we're building in the early years of dating, of getting married, is solid, and then we can build on it.
Absolutely. And what are those things that you encourage couples in the very early stages? I love how you framed it as having the most energy for the relationship, right? In that honeymoon phase. What are the things that you encourage them to be thinking about even before they come to you?
Yeah. So much of it is just aligning what we want our lives to look like, what our expectations are, right? Sometimes expectations is like a bad word when it comes to relationships, but I think you have to acknowledge and appreciate that we all have expectations when it comes to, especially something like marriage, something that has so much significance in our lives. And so, really trying to get each person to understand what their expectations are and align those so that we can kind of create a life that's going to work for both of us, right? There's some people that might be like, my expectation is I'm going to work a ton and I'm going to develop this like really dynamic career, and that's going to support our family. And that's really important, right? And that's a valuable thing. Now, that's a great situation if your partner wants to support that, right? But if your partner's like, I actually want to have the really dynamic career and make the choices that are going to be for my career, then that's going to be really challenging and require you to kind of like get into alignment of like, what's this going to look like really for us, right? So some of the big things, career, our relationships with our families of origin, what we want that to look like, that's usually really challenging. How we want to approach having kids, I always say that's the pivotal moment, right? In a marriage is when we choose whether or not to invite kids into our dynamic and how we transition into that phase. So those are some of the kind of big picture things. And every relationship, every couple I work with, they have some specific things that they also want to work on that we try to address.
I love how you came out specifically with expectations and how crucial it is to not only voice them, but especially for like, going back to your example, if we have two folks that are like in the same spot, right? I also want to fit this role and you want to fit this role. What sort of exercises or strategies do you have for folks that might be in that position that want to get on the same page and really get to the core of like, okay, so what does compromise look like? Or how do we go about making this healthy and real for us? Totally.
And the word I always like to use, this is just in my practice, is negotiate, right?
Yeah, I love
it. because we want something where we can really, when we run into that, right, as a situation where it feels like I want this and you want this, and it's kind of like a 0 or 1. We have to make a decision. I often think we're invited to feel like it's black or white, but there usually is a lot of space between that. Right. And what I encourage people to take a step back and say, like, why is this important to me? Why is it that I want to have the dynamic career? Why is it that I don't want to change my last name? Why is it that I, want to get a prenuptial agreement? And if we can articulate that kind of why, the bigger picture issue for us that's important, and then we can get our partner to do the same thing, and we can kind of start from there. There's a lot of ways you could honor those sorts of things, right? And find a way to kind of make something work right together. But that's where I think you have to start. Is like, all right, let's stop just arguing about the same thing we've been arguing about. Let's put our tools down for a second here, and let's just say, well, why is this important to both of us? And is there a way to honor the thing that we're really trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, I think that's especially using the word negotiation instead of compromise, where there seems to be a loser in compromise. Yes.
Right.
That is key, especially in the position and the way that you're thinking about it. And then the second thing that you brought up that was really important is kids. And when do you think the right time to bring up the kids conversation is?
I mean, as soon as you can, right? There's a reason most dating apps have that as a filter selection for when you're just swiping, right? Because this is an issue where if you're not aligned, some issues, if you're not aligned, you're like, oh, okay, I want to retire when I'm 65. You want to retire when you're 60. We can probably kind of like, that'll come out in the wash. It's really a binary thing with kids. I want kids. I don't want kids. You have to make a decision, on that. But I would advise people to do that before they get married, right? And you look at the statistics around divorce, and I know people throw the divorce statistics out, and it's kind of like a boogeyman sort of thing. But I think about it more specifically, like most divorces happen in the first 10 years of marriage, right? And you think about what's happening in the first 10 years of a marriage. Almost always for people, that's when they're choosing whether or not to have kids. And when they're starting to have kids, and introduce them into their dynamic. So it's a pivotal decision, like I've been saying, to kind of get aligned, make sure we're on the same page when it comes to that. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to recover, right? And do the work you need later on. Yeah.
And do you have any strategies? Because I think kids is a really big one. It is a zero. It's a 0 to 1, right? We're either doing it or we're not.
Right.
And we got to be on the same page about that.
Right.
Is that something that you see common now, where people are having a hard time really deciding if kids is really for us? Yeah.
Yeah. I talk about this probably every week with people, right? Where they're trying to figure out, one person either doesn't want to have kids, the other person really does. Both people are maybe uncertain about if they want to have kids. It's a thing where if at different ages, I'm more concerned about it. Like if you're like 21 and you're getting married and you don't know if you want to have kids, there's obviously risk attendant to getting married to 21.
Sure.
But
regardless.
But it's okay. Maybe if you don't have a certain idea of that, right? But if you do have a really fixed idea, like I don't want to have kids, that's a valid thing to not want to have. You do to not want to have kids. You want to make sure that you're with someone that is on the same page. Because like the idea anytime I work with someone that's getting divorced or in that process of getting divorced, usually this is like a thing that comes up, right? In some way, it's like, I believe that they're going to change their mind, or I believe that, after seeing all of their friends have kids, they'd want to have kids. And it's like, well, if someone's telling you they don't want to have kids, I believe them, right? But it's okay if there's a little flexibility around it, especially if you're younger.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I heard you also work with couples that might be going through the dissolution of a marriage and not just, yes.
Right. I get them coming in and going out.
The whole spectrum, baby.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you see the same conversations happening on both ends, just happening at different times? Or is the dynamic and the topics relatively different?
Yeah, it's interesting because especially because when you work as a therapist, you kind of see multiple people in a day. And so you can see people, sometimes I'll see people like a premarital couple in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I'll see a couple that's getting divorced or that's thinking about getting divorced. And the thing I notice is that premarital couples, when they come in, they'll be like, oh, there's this one thing he does. It kind of, it's really more cute than it bothers me.
Right.
It's like, it's really cute. And then the couples that are getting divorced, they're like, F you, you've been doing this our whole relationship. It's always been this way, and you can tell that this was a thing probably right back then that was like a cute, funny quirk of being different, right?
Wow.
But it develops into something that can become really, intense, right? So I when I do premarital counseling with couples or my Launch to Land course, I know we're going to talk about. I encourage people, when you notice some of those areas of difference that are maybe even just only a little bit challenging right away, just to kind of dog ear that and to be like, this is probably going to come up again, right? So many issues in a marriage are perpetual, right? They're kind of always there. Dynamics about the way that we, are in relationship together that don't change. But the way we handle them is kind of what defines our success.
Absolutely. So we're talking about the cutesy side. So,
yes.
where we're so delicate with how we bring it up before the ring. And then after the ring, we're throwing the ring. And it's like, I'm so sick and tired of it.
Yeah. Right.
What are some things that couples should be considering and talking about besides, negotiation skills and bringing things up early and often once they get engaged?
Right. Once you're really starting to think about getting married, obviously at that point you're wanting to talk about like how much of our financial lives are we going to merge? Like, what's that going to look like? How do we want, to become a we when it comes to our finances? Like what do we want, our family development to look like? Do we have shared goals, right? How do we want the same amount of kids? Where do we want to live, right? Making sure that we're kind of aligned on some of those big picture life things and kind of also the timeline of when we want those things to happen, right? Because it's very common for, one person to be like, yes, I want to have kids, but I don't want to have kids until I'm 35, right? The other person's like, usually in heterosexual relationships, this is where the woman in the relationship is more like, well, the kind of clock is ticking. Maybe we need to think about that sooner, right? So more of those kind of where the rubber meets the road conversations are important. And a big thing also in the early years is like how we relate to our families of origin or our own group of friends, like, transitioning from, being a son or a daughter, right, to starting our own family. That's a really challenging sort of transition for people, and a good thing to kind of figure out where our specific challenges are going to be, right, as a couple, because everyone's different.
Absolutely. So I think, and I could be wrong, but it feels like therapy has had this stigma or taboo.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Is that still true today?
Well, I think especially couples therapy, there's definitely a huge conversation about mental health happening in our culture and society, which is great. Yeah. But couples therapy is very much like something people decided that you do when you're like, as last rites essentially for a relationship. And I really try to encourage people to think about it more like going to the dentist, right? Like you could go to the dentist with a mouthful of rotten teeth, but they're not going to be able to help you very much, right? If you go to the dentist consistently and you're like, hey, maybe I could floss more. Maybe, there's a cavity we need to fix. You're going to see a lot more benefit from that, right? And so that's what I love about premarital counseling, doing premarital counseling with people. The thing I tell them is the biggest benefit is that not only are we going to have these conversations right away, some of which maybe you've had before, but you now have a relationship with a therapist. So, I work with people that I did premarital counseling with a decade ago, right? And it's like they come back in, we meet for an hour, and they do the work that a couple that never done therapy before would have done in like 3 months, right?
Wow.
Because you have that relationship, because they kind of already have familiarity with the process of therapy, and you can dive right in. So there certainly is still stigma, couples counseling, especially about doing any kind of counseling before getting married. So often you're like, why should we, if we're going to therapy before we're married, that's a problem in and of itself. And it's like, no, that's like actually a really good thing, to kind of have that support.
Right. So if someone in the relationship, they're on the fringes of being so excited, they're planning their wedding, they're in the honeymoon phase, they're taco trucks, where are we, all the fun stuff, right? The glitz and the glamour of getting married. But now they want to go to their partner and ask them, can we go to premarital counseling?
Yeah.
How do they bring that up? What's the best approach?
Yeah. Well, I just think of it as like something that, we can frame as from like a strengths-based perspective. This is going to help us feel even better about the decision we're making, because we know we're going to talk to someone that's a trained professional that's going to, reinforce the areas where we're doing well, but also kind of give us some tools for the areas where we know we could use some growth, right? And that we have some challenges. And there is no relationship, there's no marriage where you're going to be free from challenges. And I think it's important to highlight, right? Every relationship, just because of the nature of two different people coming together, has difficulties, right? And you are going to be served best by having tools and knowing where those difficulties are and how to deal with them, right? And that's what premarital counseling does for you.
Yeah. If one of the pushbacks is, oh, well, we'll just figure it out as we go. We got this. We've been, dating this long, blah, blah, whatever the pushback is.
Right.
Is that an okay approach? Is it okay to just say, you know what, you're right, we'll just consider therapy when I get a cavity, right? When something does come up? Sure. Or do you still push back and say it's better to get ahead of it now, just in case?
Yeah. I just think it is so valuable, especially premarital counseling, to establish that kind of foundation, to do it in a really thoughtful way. Because, you could deal with it later, but later you're going to have a lot more challenges. You're going to certainly, if you have kids, it's not going to get easier to go to therapy, or to start therapy, to start something like this. So starting at a time when it is a lot easier is really beneficial. It's like saving for retirement or something. Like you're going to get a lot more benefit the earlier you start than, later, right? Even if it doesn't feel as important right away.
I love that. And that analogy makes so much sense to me. Get ahead of it. You're going to wish you would have done it years ago, right? It's the same argument. Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think the traditional scenario for going to therapy is like you meet in an office, you guys are going to sit on the couch and you guys are going to have tough conversations. What are some ways to prepare for going to premarital counseling if it is your first time?
Yeah. I think that the main thing I would encourage people to think about is premarital counseling. What I find is it can be positive and fun. The hope is that, it's not like we're going and, the idea is that this person's going to judge us and tell us all the stuff we're doing wrong, right? We're going to them and we're bringing our relationship. We're saying, this is our relationship. This is what we do well. This is the stuff that we're good at. These are our strengths, right? This is the stuff we've been through. And then we also know these are some of the areas of challenge right now. And we're also kind of aware, okay, in the coming years, months and years, we're going to be going through a lot of transition. And we don't necessarily, what we don't know is like how we're going to navigate through that. And going to a therapist, right, is someone that has sat with a lot of couples is going to tell you, well, I can tell you how that's going to look, like this issue you have. This is how that might be challenging when you start trying to have kids, right? And so let's start working on that right now, right? And get ahead of it. And so that's what I encourage people to do when you're approaching therapy. Like, think about what are our strengths as a couple? What can we tell the therapist we do well together? And then what are the like 2 or 3 things we feel like we could grow in? Even if it's a low key sort of thing. Where do we want to see growth? Because you want to have that kind of growth mindset as a couple, right? Even if you're getting married and you're excited about your relationship, you still want to think about how you're going to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. What are the 3 most common things that you wish people would discuss before getting married that most of the time they don't?
Yeah. I think the most common thing that I run into that I wish people would talk about more is sex, right? Their sexual lives, right? Especially for younger people, there's this feeling of we should just be doing it and enjoying it, and it should just be an easy thing, right? But to, have sex for pleasure for a lifetime, right, is not intuitive. It's not something people just do, right? It's something that you develop and you go through all these stages of evolution and adaptation and growth as a couple when it comes to your sexual life. And that only happens if you have the skills to communicate about it, right? So that's like area number one that I find that I wish people would be comfortable talking about it, or open up about some of the things that they feel like, oh, we don't need to talk about this, right?
Right.
That's a big thing. And then, finances certainly is really important, figuring out where we're both at, what we're both bringing into the relationship, how we want to build and grow that together, right? So that's really important. And then family of origin, like what's it look like for us what do the holidays look like? Whose house are we going to? Like, what are our expectations for how much time we're going to spend with each family and how involved they're going to be in our lives?
Yeah, I think sex is a big one. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think you're right. It's just something that people think, oh, it's just supposed to happen. We just do it. It's not a big thing. It's over in a few minutes, whatever,
Right. Yes.
It's a really big one.
Yeah.
Do you have any other suggestions or things that folks should consider once they get engaged besides premarital counseling that you think would ensure the longevity and the health of their marriage?
I think talking to a financial advisor is also a really good thing, right? If you're going to have a prenuptial agreement, right? Obviously your organization, right? Makes that a lot easier and less expensive for people, right? To kind of approach things like that are really valuable. Like again, thinking about the themes I've been talking about, like making sure that we feel comfortable with each other's families and that we're going to enjoy, right, our time of getting married and joining families, right? That's a valuable thing as well.
Yeah, and back to prenups. Our favorite topic ever.
Right.
Why
Hello,
do you think
prenup.
Hello, prenup. Yes, hello. Why do you think prenups are a good idea in the vein of all of those amazing themes that you were just talking about?
Yeah. Well, just like we're talking about aligning expectations, and figuring out like what do we want our lives to look like, marriage obviously ultimately is a contract, right? There's a social contract element of it, but then there's a legal contract element of it, right? And anytime you're signing a legal contract, it's useful to consult, someone with legal knowledge, right? That's something I just think is kind of, say, if I'm buying a home, right, I'd like to hear from somebody who is going to provide me with what the legal ramifications of this contract are, right? Any sort of thing like that. So it's valuable, right, to have that just like on that level, right? And then I think also what I've seen so often for people is that a prenuptial agreement, it can remove certain elements from the relational part of it, right? So an example I think about often is like if someone is coming into a relationship with like a significant family asset or significantly more assets maybe than someone else, right? That dynamic can become a problem in a relationship, right? Is this just about money, or am I staying in a relationship that's not healthy or helpful for me because of the financial reality of what it would look like to divorce, right? Because we don't have like something set up, ahead of time. And a prenup takes all that off the table, right? It allows the relationship to be about the relationship, and the contractual element is something that we can kind of take care of and hopefully not feel like we have to revisit or becomes this kind of like big monster in our fights, right? And so that's something that I've seen and why I advise couples to really consider a prenuptial agreement, because it kind of takes all the stuff that can be a problem off the table.
Keep it focused on our love and why we're here, right? The essence of why we're even doing this and conjoining in a way. How do you encourage couples to have the prenup conversation? We have all kinds of tactics and techniques over here, but from your vantage point and your experience, what do you think is the best way to approach the conversation of, hey, babe, we should think about a prenup?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely always important, I think, for it to be something we both agree on, right? Because if it's coerced, obviously there's legal issues with that, but there's also, it's just not going to provide the function I just described. Right. And so I encourage people to talk about like why they usually the dynamic I'm sure you've run into a lot. The dynamic I see a lot is that one person is more interested in it than the other. Right. That's usually the challenge that we run into. Right. Just like I was talking about earlier, trying to unpack why, right? That's the case. Why is it that it feels important to me? And why is it that you feel like hesitant about this, right? There's a lot of valid reasons to feel hesitant, right? That's totally okay. And understanding the kind of why for both of you and trying to figure out, is there a way to honor both of our whys when it comes to this? And almost always there are, right? These agreements can be very flexible or can kind of look like a bunch of different ways depending on the couple and the situation. And so that's my encouragement. Like just let's understand why it's important for somebody and figure out for yourself, can you articulate why it's important for you? And then understand for your partner why it might be a challenge for them, right? And figure out if there's a way to honor both of your desires.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we always talk about is like play to your partner's strengths when it comes to approaching the topic. So
right.
If you know that they're going to be super exhausted after meeting marathons on a Monday, it's not the best time.
Totally.
But plan a money date, go talk about it during, have that moment where you guys discuss all of the things and present it at such a time. I love that. And in general, what's the number one thing that you would like to gift folks with as a technique or an exercise for any sort of conflict resolution? Or is there a one size fits all approach to conflict resolution?
Well, if there was, obviously that'd be a nice way to make a tidy profit, right? If there's just a single thing that worked for everybody. But it's also what makes being a therapist so dynamic and interesting, right? Is that every couple is different, right? Two different people drawn to each other in different ways and with different family backgrounds, different expectations, different ways of communicating. And so there isn't like a one size fits all thing. But a thing that I find to be really helpful for a lot of different couples, because a thing couples run into is maybe one person is like pursuing, let's resolve this conflict right now. We have to do it, right? And the other person distances when that happens, right? They become uncomfortable and they shut down, right? I think it's really helpful to have some kind of safe word as a couple where it's like, all right, we have a system where I say, whatever it is, pineapple. And that means that we're going to pause for a second here, when an argument is escalating and we're going to kind of like, take a intentional moment away from each other and then revisit it, right? We're not brushing things under the rug, but we are kind of pausing. And there's been a lot of research around things like this. And it's been found that, hey, if you have a safe word as a couple, when you're in this kind of like escalation pattern and you can take a step back, as long as the person that calls the safe word is the person that brings it back up, right? The ball's in their court, right? To kind of bring things back. And as long as that happens within 24 hours, that's really been effective, right? For people to kind of give themselves the space they need to both be present in the conversation.
I think it's interesting that you put the onus on the person with the pineapple, if you will.
Yeah. Right.
And the 24-hour turnaround to revisit it. Is there, what's the methodology behind revisiting it in a fresh, I consider 24 hours pretty fresh. Maybe that's a long time. But.
Well, it's within 24 hours. So it could be as short as 5 minutes, right? But you don't want it to be like longer, right? Because I think what happens often is that the person who's more likely to shut down, if their partner feels like they're just kicking the can down the road and they're not going to revisit it and they're not doing this in good faith, then that's not going to be helpful. That's just brushing something under the rug, right? Which we're trying to avoid. The idea of this is it's like, hey, I just can't participate in this right now in the way that you want to. But I still do desperately want to reach conclusion with you and resolution. So let me get to a place, by myself where I can, right? There's one couple I work with, they have a couch in their living room that they nicknamed Switzerland, right? Because they go there for like peace trees, peace summits, right? So that's what they do, right? And when the person who kind of calls the safe word is ready, they kind of invite their partner to Switzerland and they have a summit, right? And they reconnect. So that's it's different for every couple, but that's been a helpful tool for a lot of people to find resolution.
Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of a tool that you brought up earlier, let's talk about Launch to Land. What is that?
Yeah. So Launch to Land is my premarital counseling video series where I basically have kind of bottled up, right, everything that I've talked about my approach to premarital counseling and created like a counseling experience for people, right? So it's 7 sessions and they're kind of meant to be, attended and approached as sessions, and they're pre-recorded with me. So as the couple, like sits down with their glass of wine or, tea, and then they turn on the session and I talk with couples about, some of the things I'm discussing today, and then ask them questions to discuss with each other, right? And there's activities as part of the process of trying to figure out all these things we're discussing, right? What does our, future relationship with each other's families look like? What are our expectations for having kids? What do we want that to look like? How do we want our relationship to transition well through that period of time? Some of the hot topic issues like sex and finances and religion, things like that, we talk about as well. And so it's 7 sessions and you kind of space it out like you would premarital counseling, but you just do it at your own time, from the comfort of your own home. And it is the cost of a single session. So That's the benefit, right?
Yeah, I love that. And it almost feels like a soft launch into premarital counseling where it's like, let's get into the idea of this and having it be part of our exercise plan early and often, and then visiting you for a more therapeutic and deeper approach to really dig into the aspect of going back and forth with you.
And you can do it from anywhere in the world, right? So anyone could do it. And what I encourage it and I talk about in the course is like, hey, if there's some specific issues that are going to be really challenging coming up, then that would be a great thing to visit in more depth with a therapist. But otherwise, it's pretty comprehensive, right? And allows for you to have all those very important conversations, and especially useful if your partner is hesitant about going to counseling for whatever reason.
Absolutely. Do you have any success stories that stand out in your mind of folks who came to you with X symptom and left feeling some sort of, some sort of success from you?
Right. There's one couple that this is an issue that comes up, every once in a while. It's just a very interesting one to me, where they were trying to figure out if the woman, it was a heterosexual couple, if the woman should change her last name, right?
It's a big
very traditional sort of thing. And it was really, I really loved how, this couple was very willing to kind of go into depth talking about this because they both felt very strongly, right? And it was one of those issues like we talked about earlier that felt like it was like, a standoff sort of thing. And they found ways for them to both kind of, again, they did the work of like, why is this important to you? Why is this important to you? How can I honor both of those things? And the person who didn't want to change her name, she was saying that like, for me, I've accomplished so much as a person with that name, right? I've put myself through college and grad school and that's the person that did it, right? And for me to shift my identity fundamentally because of that feels wrong, right? And it just it would not be true to myself, right? And so, for the other person, it was like, hey, this to me feels like creating a family, right? Being a family together, right? We have the same name, right? And they kind of arrived with a number of agreements they made to her not changing her name, but their kids would have the father's name and things like that. And it was just meaningful work, right? That I was very proud of how in depth they got and how true they were to themselves, right? Because I worry always about like cheap compromise, because I feel like that's usually comes back and bites people in the end.
Right. No, I love that. And that's definitely a conversation that we see on our end too, especially with more women, being breadwinners in the family or for whatever reason. I'm going through that right now. I went through a divorce. And so I'm going back to my maiden name, and depending on who I call, I have a different last name. There's so many logistical reasons among the ethical, cultural, religious reasons. Yeah, it's a big conversation. So I love that they were able to come to a place of resolution for that, because it's a big deal. So if folks want to use Launch to Land, where can they go to do that?
Yeah, launchtoland.com is the your home for everything launch to land. And for your listeners, I'm going to have a 15% discount code, HelloPrenup. And so, use that code when you check out and you get 15% off, and it's $150 for 7 sessions, right? So basically in most areas, premarital counseling, a single session with a couples counselor would be $150. So this is 7 sessions for the price of one, and with the added flexibility, right? Benefit. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. Launch to Land. Absolutely. Yes. That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Trevor. I really appreciate you taking the time to dig deeper into what does this look like and the benefits of it. And I know I'm definitely sold. If people want to get in touch with you outside of Launch to Land, is there anywhere that they could do that?
Yeah, on Instagram, Launch to Land. That's where people can find me, and the best place to reach out. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Trevor. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on. I feel very honored.
Of course. And thanks so much for listening, everyone. Tuning in soon. Bye.